Back here, the University of Minnesota Duluth officially has a new leader. Charles Nies was approved by the Board of Regents yesterday. The Minnesota native comes to UMD with 25 years of higher education experience, most recently as Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at a California university. He hopes to continue research already underway at the university and wants to build on the tight-knit Duluth community. Nies wants to keep UMD at the forefront of system-wide conversations.
To make sure that Duluth is at the table when we have those conversations so that the expertise and the work that our faculty are doing is brought to that conversation and is part of the solution seeking that we all are going to be doing.
Nies hopes to host listening sessions with students, faculty, and staff when he arrives. One of his initial focuses will be on enrollment. He takes over on July 1st. An interim chancellor has been filling the role since former Chancellor Lindley Black retired 2 years ago.